This tragedy has truly rocked this tight-knit community, from the police officers to the people who live in that neighborhood.
The scope of this incident is something that this community has not seen in a number of years.
They were a very nice family and hug your relatives.
Shocking is one of the few words that can even begin to describe what happened. At 7:15 p.m. on January 17, 2020, in a quiet house in Grantsville, Utah, a tragedy unfolded that still ranks as one of the most heartbreaking cases in recent memory. 4 members of the Haynie family were killed while their father fought for his life for nearly an hour. The person responsible for this unimaginable act was a teenager, a fact that stunned neighbors, first responders, and reporters alike. This is the story of the Haney family. Grantsville, Utah was the kind of place where people moved to raise families. Clean streets, good schools, and a strong Mormon community made it feel like a bubble of safety in an increasingly dangerous world. The Haney family seemed to embody everything this town stood for. Colin Haney Sr., 50 years old, worked hard to provide for his large family. A devoted member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he believed in discipline, faith, and family above all else. His wife, Consuelo Alejandra Haney, everyone called her Alexia, was 52 and the true heart of their home. Born in Chihuahua, Mexico, she'd built her entire world around her children. One neighbor even joked that Alexia cooked so well, she could probably teach Gordon Ramsay a few tricks. Everyone in their church ward knew her kitchen skills were on another level. During potlucks, people would wait around her dishes because they knew hers were always the ones that stood out. And when she wasn't cooking, she was out in her garden, proudly taking care of her fruit trees, even through Utah's tough winters. Meanwhile, the Haney children were homeschooled for most of their lives, creating bonds that neighbors described as unusually close. Alexis, 15, was a freshman at Grantsville High School who played goalkeeper on the junior varsity soccer team. She had an artist's eye and musician's soul, playing piano beautifully and creating sculptures that amazed her teachers. Just weeks before her death, she'd completed an Iron Man sculpture that her uncle still displays in his living room, unable to part with this piece of his niece's creativity. Matthew, 14, was the family strategist, an 8th grader who thought 6 moves ahead in chess and could quote entire Star Wars scenes from memory. His favorite line, "I have the high ground," became a family joke during game nights. Despite his competitive nature, friends remembered him as the kid who'd help younger scouts on camping trips without being asked, mixing fierce competition with genuine kindness. Milan, 12, packed more determination into her small frame than seemed possible. A 7th grader who dreamed of becoming an engineer, she played soccer and volleyball with an intensity that surprised opponents. At birthday parties, other kids would wait for Milan's turn at the piñata, knowing her strength would break it open for everyone. She left little notes around the house, encouraging messages signed mysteriously as "from so-and-so" that her family treasured. Their eldest son, Danny, 24, was away at Utah Valley University, building his own life while staying connected to his tight-knit family through regular calls. He had no idea that January 17th would be the last day his family existed as he knew it. And then there was Colin Jeffrey Haney, CJ to everyone, 16 years old, and struggling in ways nobody fully understood. The problem started 6 months before the murders in summer 1929. After years of homeschooling, CJ was enrolled at Grantsville High School for his junior year. What should have been exciting became his undoing. CJ had an anxiety disorder that made crowded hallways feel like war zones. His speech impediment, barely noticeable among loving siblings, became a source of crushing shame in classrooms full of strangers. Teachers called him reserved and quiet, but those words didn't capture his drowning. He looked like a perfect target for bullying, one neighbor observed, watching CJ walk alone to school each morning. You could see he hadn't found his people. Now, whether that was actually happening or not, it's important to be clear. Being bullied never excuses anyone from doing something terrible. And of course, we don't support bullying in any form. but the contrast in his life was hard to ignore. At home, CJ was surrounded by siblings who understood him, who made him feel like he belonged. But once he stepped into school, he became just another quiet, awkward teen trying to survive the chaos of public school life, completely unprepared for the social pressure and loneliness that came with it. On top of everything else, life at home wasn't as perfect as people might imagine. Parents often hope their kids will make good choices, but sometimes those expectations become heavy. By December 2019, CJ's arguments with his father had grown far beyond the usual teen disagreements. They had turned into major sources of stress: school, church, spending time with friends, even something as simple as playing video games. All of it became a point of conflict. CJ wasn't just struggling to meet the expectations placed on him, he felt completely overwhelmed by them, like he was slowly sinking under pressure he didn't know how to handle. Then came the moment that could have changed everything. Around late December 2019 or early January 2020, Alexia told her eldest son Danny that CJ had been saying dark things. These statements frightened her enough to recognize her son needed professional help. She talked to Colin Sr. about getting CJ into therapy. Colin refused. According to Danny's later testimony, their father didn't want CJ speaking to a therapist because he feared what might come out. Anything that could create legal problems, or anything that might bring shame from their church community. That fear became stronger than the mother's instinct that her son was in real trouble. She knew something was wrong, but every attempt to get CJ help was shut down before it even began. Everything finally came to a breaking point on Friday, January 17th, 2020. The day started out like any normal morning. CJ stayed home from school, saying he didn't feel well, but instead of resting, he spent the entire morning preparing for what he was about to do. He took guns from the family's collection and placed ammunition around the house in spots he knew he could reach quickly. His plan was organized and deliberate. Wait for each family member to come home one by one, kill them, and make sure no one discovered the bodies before he was ready. At 1 p.m., Alexia and 12-year-old Milan came home together after school pickup. They walked through the front door like they always did, probably talking about plans for the weekend or schoolwork. CJ shot them immediately at close range. Alexia, the same mother who had fought to get her son mental health treatment just weeks earlier, was killed by the child she had been trying to help. About an hour later, at around 2 p.m., 15-year-old Alexis arrived home. She was the artistic one in the family, always busy with soccer, drawing, and school activities. She had no idea what she was walking into. CJ shot her 5 times as soon as she stepped inside. For the next 3 hours, CJ stayed in the house with the bodies of his mother and 2 sisters. During that time, 2 different neighbors knocked on the door. One simply had a routine question. The other was the girl's piano teacher, who became concerned when Alexis and Milan didn't show up for their lesson. Neither visitor knew what was happening inside the house at that moment. Both visitors reported that CJ seemed completely normal. He was polite, gave reasonable explanations for his sister's absence, and showed no signs of distress. He stood there making small talk while his mother and sisters lay dead just feet away. At 5:17 p.m., Matthew came home from a birthday party. As mentioned earlier, he was 14, a kid who loved Star Wars and games, and he was especially close to CJ. He walked into the house like he always did, probably expecting to see his siblings or smell dinner cooking. Instead, the moment he called out for his family, CJ shot him in the head at close range. What prosecutors later described as an execution-style killing. Matthew didn't run, didn't scream, didn't even suspect danger. The way he approached CJ with complete trust showed just how far removed CJ had become from reality. The final part of the tragedy unfolded at 6:15 p.m. when their father, Colin Sr., arrived home from work. Immediately, he sensed something was off. The house was darker and quieter than usual. He called out their names, expecting someone to answer. Instead, he saw CJ standing in the shadows, pointing a gun at him. CJ fired several shots, hitting his father once in the leg. A violent struggle began. During the fight, CJ told his father that everyone else in the family was already dead and that he planned to kill every family member except himself. When Colin desperately begged for his life and told CJ that Alexia would be heartbroken if he killed his own father, CJ responded without emotion that she was already dead. The fight dragged on for nearly an hour. Colin, bleeding heavily from the gunshot wound and repeated blows, kept trying to disarm his son. CJ repeatedly struck him in the head with the gun, leaving Colin's face covered in blood. Despite this, the father never stopped fighting back. The struggle only came to an end when a neighbor arrived to return a set of house keys and unknowingly walked in on the chaos. Colin used the distraction to wrestle the gun out of CJ's hands, finally stopping the 5-hour killing spree.
There have been a lot of tears shed on our street.
Shock and devastation as people try to piece together what happened here Friday night.
It's just really, really tough for everybody.
Grantsville police believe a teenage boy used a handgun to shoot 5 people he lived with. A woman and 3 children died. A man was taken to the hospital. It's the deadliest shooting in the city of Grantsville's history.
We are a very small community. We're a tight-knit community. Most everyone knows everyone. The scope of this incident is something that this community has not seen in a number of years.
The investigation began with that neighbor's frantic 911 call at 7:15 p.m. as she drove Colin and CJ to the hospital. During the ride, CJ calmly confessed to the neighbor that he'd killed his family, an admission that would become crucial evidence. Grantsville police arrived at the home around 7 p.m. to find a scene that would haunt veteran officers for years. 4 bodies throughout the house, each killed with multiple gunshots from the same family handgun. The systematic nature immediately told investigators this wasn't a moment of rage. This was planned. "It's shocking news. It's beyond words," said Corporal Rhonda Fields, the department spokesperson. "It's an unbelievable reality that we have to accept now." For a town without a homicide in nearly 20 years, processing a quadruple murder felt impossible. The crime scene revealed the horrifying timeline. Murders spread across 5 hours, with CJ calmly waiting between each killing.
The defendant's mother picked up defendant's 12-year-old sister Malin from school at about 1 p.m. The defendant murdered his mother and Malin not long after they returned home by firing multiple rounds from a handgun into their heads, necks, and upper bodies. At approximately 2 p.m., the 15-year-old sister Alexa came home from school. Sometime between her arrival and 5:17 p.m., the defendant murdered Alexis. She died from multiple gunshot wounds to her head and upper body.
Despite confessing to the neighbor, CJ refused to speak with investigators once formally arrested. This sudden silence hampered efforts to understand his motive. The Utah Bureau of Forensic Services conducted extensive analysis, examining electronic devices, looking for answers. Crime scene analysis revealed multiple shooting locations throughout the house. Evidence showed the father-son struggle. Ballistic evidence confirmed all victims were killed with the same weapon. The investigation revealed specific wound patterns that painted a picture of methodical violence. Perhaps most disturbing was witness testimony about CJ's demeanor between killings. He'd interacted normally with neighbors while standing in a house containing dead bodies. This ability to compartmentalize horrified investigators. Prosecutor Scott Broadhead later explained that investigators went through every digital device the family owned, laptops, tablets, and phones, hoping to find some kind of explanation for what CJ had done. In cases like this, authorities usually expect to uncover warning signs, violent searches, threatening messages, troubling online communities, or personal diaries hidden on devices. But in CJ's case, there was nothing like that. What they discovered instead was a teenager who appeared overwhelmed by anger toward his father and terrified of failing the people around him. There were no messages planning violence, no writings describing a fantasy of killing, just a consistent pattern of stress, frustration, and fear of disappointing his family. Corporal Fields of the Grantsville Police Department later addressed the public's biggest question, the same question investigators kept asking themselves. We all have those same questions. Why? We don't know, he admitted. Even with all the evidence laid out, the true motive was still painfully unclear. A psychological evaluation conducted after CJ's arrest helped paint a larger picture. Specialists found that CJ was dealing with several serious issues at the same time: severe anxiety, very limited social skills, a delayed level of education due to years of homeschooling, and emotional immaturity that made it hard for him to handle normal teenage problems. Defense attorney Richard Van Wagoner emphasized that CJ was still far from emotional adulthood, noting he was 10 years from full brain development. According to Van Wagoner, CJ simply did not have the tools or resources to cope with sudden changes, stress, or the challenges that come with entering public school for the first time as a teenager. However, prosecutor Broadhead pushed back on this idea. He argued that while many teens struggle with social anxiety, family pressure, or difficult transitions, they do not respond by killing their families. Just about every 16-year-old in the history of this world has decided not to kill their parents, Broadhead stated. From his perspective, the psychological factors were real, but they did not justify or fully explain the extreme level of violence CJ carried out. The most chilling part of the investigation came directly from CJ's own explanation. When questioned, CJ explained that he killed his mother and sisters because he believed that if he only killed his father, the rest of the family would turn against him. This showed a disturbing level of planning and strategic thinking, even in the middle of what appeared to be a psychological crisis. He said he wanted a clean slate and a new opportunity, not an escape from life, but the removal of the people he thought were holding him back. It was not a case of wanting to die. It was a case of wanting to start over with no family attached to him. On January 22, 2020, Colin Jeffrey Haynie was officially charged in connection with the deaths of his family. He faced 4 counts of aggravated murder for the killings of his mother and 3 siblings, 1 count of attempted aggravated murder for the attack on his father, and 5 counts of felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury. All of these were first-degree felonies, the most serious level under Utah law. Because CJ was 16 at the time, the state automatically tried him as an adult, meaning he would face adult sentencing and prison if convicted. The court set bail at $4 million, effectively $1 million per life lost. The unusually high bail reflected both the gravity of the crimes and the perceived danger CJ posed to the public. Outside the courthouse, defense attorney Richard Van Wagoner spoke to reporters, calling the events the most horrific tragedy for the entire family, for their friends, and for this close-knit community. Van Wagoner highlighted that while the legal process would determine CJ's punishment, the emotional impact was immediate and profound. The Haney family, once viewed as a quiet, close family in their community, had become the center of one of the state's most shocking tragedies. The community struggled to process the tragedy. Yellow ribbons appeared throughout Grantsville, on trees, lampposts, fences. A memorial fund for surviving family members raised over $100,000 within weeks. People who'd never met the Haneys contributed, touched by the senseless loss. For Colin Sr., the aftermath was unbearable. Through his attorney, he said, "Colin can hardly comprehend what has happened. This loss is almost unbearable." On July 19, 2022, CJ Haney, now 19, pleaded guilty to all charges. A year later, on July 12, 2023, 20-year-old CJ was sentenced to 4 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life for the murders, plus another 25 years to life concurrently for attempting to kill his father, effectively 100 years in prison. "I want you to know I've learned from what I've done," CJ told the court, his words ringing hollow against the magnitude of his crimes. 3rd District Judge Teresa Welch didn't mince words. You not only deprived your family members of their lives in such a tragic and terrible manner, but you also deprived yourself of your life with them. These are the people who loved you most. Colin Sr., present at sentencing, declined to speak, but Danny addressed the court via audio, explaining they'd seen red flags about a month before the murders. He was robbed by not getting proper help, Danny said. This could have been prevented. The case remains Utah's deadliest mass shooting since 2007. It stands as a stark reminder that mental health struggles, when combined with family dysfunction and missed interventions, can lead to unthinkable consequences. For Grantsville, healing came slowly. The town that hadn't seen violence in decades now carried this weight. People looked at their own teenagers differently, wondering what signs they might be missing. Mental health resources in the community expanded. Church leaders began speaking more openly about seeking professional help. The Haynie home on Eastmore Drive stood empty for months, a physical reminder of January 17th. Eventually, it sold to a family from out of state who didn't know its history, but longtime residents still slow down when they pass, remembering the family that once lived there. Today, Colin Sr. lives quietly, carrying grief that will never fully heal. Danny continues his education, honoring his siblings' memory while building his own life. And CJ sits in prison, where he'll likely spend the rest of his days. The most haunting part isn't just what happened, it's what could have been prevented. A mother's instinct to get help for her troubled son was overruled by fear of stigma and legal consequences. That decision cost 4 lives and destroyed countless others. As Prosecutor Broadhead said during the trial, teenage arguments about school and video games happen in every home. But in the Haney house, normal teenage rebellion met untreated mental illness, social isolation, and family dysfunction. The result was catastrophe. The case changed how Utah approaches juvenile mental health and violent crime. It sparked conversations about the balance between family privacy and intervention. It reminded everyone that sometimes the greatest danger comes from within the walls we call home. Justice was served. CJ will likely die in prison. But for the survivors, knowing that help was just a therapy session away makes the tragedy even harder to bear. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. Over the years, we've covered many cases where a teenage son turned on their own family. And another one of the most haunting examples is the Humiston family case.
Deputies arrived and found really a tragic scene is really the best way to put it.
On October 21st, 2024, several 911 calls came from Falls City about the same horrific crime. One call came from a 15-year-old boy who claimed that his 13-year-old brother had killed their entire family before taking his own life. But another caller said something completely different. The other caller insisted that the same 15-year-old was actually the one who shot everyone, including his 11-year-old sister, who survived by pretending to be dead. Now the big question is, who's really telling the truth?
It breaks my heart that there was somebody in so much pain that they chose violence against their own family.
From the very start, this case shocked everyone who heard about it. We first covered it back in October 2024, but at that time there were still no major developments. Now, with new details coming to light, it's finally time to revisit what really happened inside that house, because this isn't just another tragic story. It's one that shook not only the community, but people all over the world. We're talking about a family living in one of the safest, wealthiest neighborhoods in Washington, a family that seemed to have everything going for them. The Humistons lived in the beautiful Lake Alice community near Falls City, a place surrounded by nature and known for its quiet suburban charm. It's the kind of area where people go for morning jogs by the water, families host barbecues on weekends, and kids ride their bikes on clean, tree-lined streets. Now, in case you haven't heard of it, Lake Alice isn't just any neighborhood. It's one of those places that practically screams success. You'll see big houses with wide lawns, shiny cars parked neatly in driveways, and a sense of security that money usually buys. The Humiston family fit perfectly into that picture. They had a comfortable lifestyle, and those who knew them said they looked like the kind of family you'd see in a holiday card, happy, thriving, and close-knit. People in the community even described them as a dream family.
It's just very hard to process. I only saw the children in the driveway yesterday afternoon, playing the piano in the garage and just doing the normal things.
It's beyond belief, and we've gotten to know some of the kids that unfortunately lived at the home, and the younger kids especially, the sweetest children, so polite, homeschooled, and it's unfathomable what just happened.
And tragedy. Everybody comes together.
You never expect anything like this, even in a terrible situation, and they just seemed perfect.
The father, Mark Humiston, worked as an engineer, a stable and well-paying career that kept the family financially secure. They went on trips, made good memories, and seemed to have built a beautiful life together. But as we've seen time and time again, appearances can be deceiving, and life has a way of turning peaceful stories into tragedies overnight. And on October 21st, 2024, that peace was shattered. A neighbor named Bradley Dennis, who lived only about a quarter-mile away from the Humistons, found himself in the middle of something no one should ever have to experience. At exactly 5:02 in the morning, he made a panicked call to 911. His voice was trembling as he told the dispatcher that an 11-year-old girl had shown up at his door, injured, terrified, and begging for help. Bradley said the girl, who came from the Humiston home, was pounding on their door like her life depended on it. When he and his wife opened up, what they saw froze them in place. The child had been shot. She had a wound on her neck and another on her hand, and she was covered in blood. It was a moment straight out of a nightmare. The girl's identity hasn't been released for her safety, but for the sake of this video, we'll call her B. Through her tears and trembling voice, B told the couple that her entire family had been shot and that everyone was dead. The dispatcher tried to stay calm and asked B if she knew who had done this. And that's when she said something that completely changed the course of the investigation. Still shaking, B explained that she had heard gunshots echoing through the house, followed by her family screaming. Then, in the chaos, she caught a glimpse of the shooter's face. It was her 15-year-old brother.
Looks like we have a neighbor who's calling in as well. They're advising a female from this house came to his home. They advise that there are family members who were shot at.
B bravely recounted the most horrifying night of her life, one that no child should ever have to experience. She said that after being shot, she held her breath and pretended to be dead, clinging to the smallest chance of survival. She lay there, completely still, praying that her brother wouldn't realize she was still alive. The 15-year-old involved hasn't been publicly named because of his age, but for clarity, we'll call him Drew. What makes this story even more unsettling is that Drew had actually called 911 just minutes before B managed to escape. His call came in around 4:55 that morning, and his voice sounded panicked and shaky. He told the dispatcher, "He just shot my whole family and then killed himself." According to Drew, it was his 13-year-old brother Benjamin who had murdered their parents and siblings before taking his own life. He said he was hiding in the downstairs bathroom, terrified, and claimed that Benjamin snapped after being caught looking at graphic videos the night before. Drew insisted that he waited 10 to 15 minutes after the gunshots before calling for help. At first, it sounded like a terrified kid trying to make sense of something awful. But, as investigators would soon discover, his story didn't line up with the evidence. Not even close. In fact, the details of the crime scene painted a completely different picture. It began to look like Drew had carefully planned everything to make it seem as though Benjamin was the one responsible. According to B's statement, she and her 7-year-old sister Catherine shared a room in the basement. B slept on the top bunk, while Catherine slept below. That night, both girls were jolted awake by a series of loud gunshots echoing through the house. When B peeked out into the hallway, what she saw next was something no child should ever have to see. Her 9-year-old brother Joshua was lying motionless beside their father, Mark, who was 43. There was blood on Mark's head and around Joshua's mouth. Moments later, Bea watched in horror as Catherine climbed out of bed and stepped into the hallway, only for another gunshot to ring out. Bea froze as she saw her little sister collapse to the floor. Then Drew appeared in the doorway, holding their father's silver Glock pistol. She remembered what he was wearing too, a black and white checkered shirt, something she'd never forget. Without hesitation, he raised the gun and fired. Bea felt a searing pain shoot through her neck and hand as she fell back onto the bed. She stayed completely still, her body trembling, trying not to breathe too loudly. She could hear the chaos around her, screams, footsteps, and more gunfire. Then came a chilling silence. Bea said she heard Drew moving around the hallway, checking on the bodies, and even leaning over them to feel for pulses, as if to make sure they were dead. At one point, she thought she heard her father's phone ring, followed by Drew's voice talking to someone on the other end. That's when she realized something unthinkable. Drew was staging the scene. After what felt like forever, Drew walked back into her room. Bea's instincts kicked in. She stayed perfectly still, pretending to be lifeless. She squeezed her eyes shut and slowed her breathing, terrified that any movement might give her away. Eventually, Drew left the room and walked upstairs. From the quiet downstairs, she could hear him talking again, his tone oddly calm for someone who had just claimed to witness his entire family being murdered. The moment she was sure he was gone, Bea forced herself to move. Despite her injuries, she crawled to the small fire window, pushed it open, and climbed out. The cold air hit her face, and she gathered every bit of strength she had left to run. Barefoot and bleeding, she sprinted through the darkness toward her neighbor's house, the home of Karen and Bradley Dennis, about a quarter-mile away. When she reached their door, she banged on it frantically until Bradley answered. What he saw stunned him. Bea was covered in blood, shaking, with visible wounds on her neck and hand. Through tears, she told them her entire family had been shot. The couple immediately called 911 and tried to keep her calm until help arrived. While waiting for first responders, the Dennises gently asked her what had happened and if she knew who did it. That's when she revealed the truth. It was Drew. She told them he'd been in serious trouble lately for failing several school tests and had been arguing with their parents. She also mentioned that their father's gun was normally kept in a small lockbox near the front door. The chilling part? Drew was the only one who knew the combination. When officers arrived minutes later, they found Drew standing in the driveway. He didn't resist when they arrested him. Inside the house, the scene was beyond devastating. Just inside the entryway, detectives found the open lockbox and an empty holster sitting on a bench. The home led into a large open kitchen and dining area, with stairs leading down to the basement, where the massacre had unfolded. As they descended, they found Mark lying partly on top of Joshua, both covered in blood. Catherine was slumped nearby. In the girls' room, there was blood smeared on Bea's top bunk, where she had been shot. At the far end of the hallway lay Benjamin, face turned to the side with a Glock resting on his chest, staged to look like he had been the shooter. But as we all now know, the whole scene had been carefully staged, and the evidence didn't help his story at all. There was no blood, no gunshot residue, and not even a single trace of DNA on his hands or on the weapon. Everything pointed to one clear conclusion: Benjamin couldn't have pulled the trigger. The setup simply didn't match Drew's claim that his brother had taken his own life. In the master bedroom, they found Sarah, the mother, in a pool of blood near the bathroom. The door had been forced open, and shell casings were scattered throughout the hallway and the rooms below. The following day, the medical examiner released a heartbreaking report. Each victim had been shot at close range, except Benjamin, whose wounds suggested the shots came from a distance, more than 2 feet away, further disproving Drew's story. Mark had been shot 4 times, including once in the back of his head. Joshua and Catherine were both killed instantly by single gunshots to the head. Sarah had been shot twice. One bullet entered behind her ear, another through her eye. And Benjamin, the boy Drew had tried to blame, had 2 gunshot wounds, one to his cheek and another behind his ear, fired from different angles. B was rushed to the hospital and underwent emergency treatment. Miraculously, she survived. Her teachers and neighbors say she's been incredibly strong, though the emotional trauma is something she'll carry for the rest of her life. Now, when this story first broke, it made headlines across the country. Even major media outlets, including Nancy Grace, covered it extensively. But the reason it captured so much attention wasn't just because of how brutal the crime was. It was because of the unimaginable bravery of the sole surviving member, B, the 11-year-old girl who managed to stay alive by pretending to be dead and later escaping to get help. In the weeks following the tragedy, B became a symbol of strength and survival. Her courage moved people everywhere, and support started pouring in from across the nation: cards, donations, and heartfelt letters offering comfort and prayers. According to close family friends, B has been living with relatives ever since, under strict privacy and protection for her safety. Reports suggest she's now in therapy, slowly trying to rebuild her life while coping with the loss of nearly everyone she loved. Her recovery, however, hasn't been easy. Teachers and counselors who have spoken publicly say she struggles with nightmares and anxiety, which is completely understandable after what she's been through. The community has respected her family's request for privacy, but from what's been shared, B is continuing her education through a private program that allows her to stay home and heal emotionally. Meanwhile, the legal battle surrounding the case has been just as complicated as the investigation itself. Drew's defense team continues to argue that he's just a troubled 15-year-old who made poor decisions under emotional stress, while prosecutors maintain that this was a premeditated, calculated massacre. The key question now is whether Drew will be tried as an adult or a juvenile. If he's tried as an adult, he could face life in prison, but if the case stays in juvenile court, he'll likely be released by the time he turns 25, no matter how severe the crimes. That possibility has sparked public outrage, especially among people who believe the punishment should fit the magnitude of what happened. Adding even more tension to the case, Drew's defense filed a motion earlier this year claiming that some evidence had been mishandled by investigators. They accused law enforcement of disturbing the crime scene and argued that the prosecution relied too heavily on B's testimony, which they claim could have been influenced by trauma. Prosecutors, however, were quick to shut down those claims, saying that every piece of evidence, from the fingerprints on the lockbox to the lack of gunshot residue on Benjamin's hands, points directly to Drew as the killer. There's also been growing frustration among the public about the slow pace of the trial. Many people, especially those in the Fall City area, feel like justice is taking too long. Each new court date brings fresh delays, often due to Drew's mental evaluations and disputes between the defense and prosecution over admissible evidence. Judges have ordered several psychological assessments to determine whether Drew is competent to stand trial and whether his actions were influenced by mental illness. As of now, Drew remains in custody at the Clark Child and Family Justice Center in King County. Because he's still underage, he's being held in a secure juvenile facility rather than an adult prison. Reports from the facility say that he spends most of his time in isolation, attending mandatory counseling sessions while awaiting further court hearings. Meanwhile, the Lake Alice neighborhood still carries the scars of what happened. Many families have moved away, saying they can no longer live near the house where such horror took place. The once peaceful community now stands as a quiet reminder of how tragedy can strike anywhere, even in the safest of places. Residents have left flowers, candles, and photographs outside the Humiston home, some of which are still replaced every year on the anniversary of the killings. B's relatives have stayed mostly silent, but they've released one brief statement through their attorney thanking everyone who supported her and asking for continued prayers. They said, "She's a survivor, but she's still a child. Healing takes time, and we're grateful she's been given the space to do that." As the trial continues to move forward, both sides are preparing for what could be one of the most emotional court proceedings in recent Washington history. The outcome will not only decide Drew's fate, but also determine whether B and the rest of the community will finally get the closure they've been waiting for. For now, B is safe, surrounded by family, protected from the public, and continuing her slow path toward recovery. But the shadow of that night still lingers. The sound of those gunshots, the sight of her fallen family, and the cold realization that it was her own brother who pulled the trigger. Those are things she may never fully escape. Yet even through that darkness, her courage remains a light that continues to inspire people all over the world. Now, if you think Drew should be tried as an adult, make sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to know what you think about this case, and if you found this story important, don't forget to check out our other videos where we bring more real stories like this to light, giving a voice to the victims and shining a spotlight on the truth behind each case.